How do you do? Jen and Cam feel it would be unkind to present this program without a friendly word of warning. We are about to unfold our true crime podcast, a podcast of lifelong friends who seek to examine crimes which were committed without reckoning upon God. The discussion will be frank, and the subject matter will be of a grim and violent nature. I think it will thrill you. It might even horrify you. So, if there are young children listening, or if you feel unwilling to subject your nerves to such a strain, now's your chance to, well, we've warned you.
Hey, Jen.
Hey, Cam, how are you?
I'm great. How are you? I'm hot. It's hot. It's Missouri. I'm hot.
It's really humid, and it doesn't help that it's about to storm any second now. We've been
awful.
having a great time today trying to record because Cam's internet keeps on going out because of the weather. So.
I guess it's the weather. The last time this happened, a drunk driver hit the cable box or whatever that is at the end of the street, and it took him like 2 weeks to get it fixed.
Woohoo!
Right?
Yep.
Idiot.
I don't know. We've had our electricity blink on and off, so who knows? Yeah. We're just going to call it's the weather.
So I hear you got a case for us today.
I do. We are going back in time today to discuss one of Australia's most infamous cases of the 1970s.
Oh.
And it's actually in
I wasn't born yet, so that's good. Okay.
Liar, liar, liar. Well, to be fair, you weren't even a year yet. Let's put it that way.
Okay, good. Okay, good.
And actually, we're coming up on the 51st anniversary of it. By the time this is released, the next day is when would be 51, July 1st.
Normally, I would say that's good, but then what we do, it's not.
You ready?
So that's not good. I'm so ready.
Crawford was born out of wedlock in 1929 in Canada. His mother was young, ashamed, and couldn't cope with raising a baby alone. So she sent Elmer to live with her family in Northern Ireland, on the outskirts of Belfast, where he knew she would be properly taken care of. Both Elmer and his brother were raised by their grandparents, the majority of their early childhood and teenage years being lived through the Second World War. In 1951, 22-year-old Elmer and his brother decided to leave Ireland for good and relocate together to Melbourne, Australia, where they hoped to find success and a better life for themselves. This is quite an international story. Canada
I love it.
Via Ireland.
I do. I love it.
Ending in Australia.
Makes me happy.
Therese McManus was born in Ipswich, Queensland, and had moved to Melbourne to become a nursing aide about the same time. She held a strong Catholic faith and was described as the life of the party, an extrovert, very outgoing and bubbly. Like me. Except
totally like you. I was just thinking that could be you.
She was friendly to everyone she met, and her favorite thing to do was dance. She frequently attended dances with her friends, and in the 1950s, at one of those dances, she met Elmer Crawford. The pair had a whirlwind romance, and Therese fell pregnant with their first daughter, Kathryn. Because of Therese's faith, the pair decided to marry and began living with each other in quick succession. In 1957, the year Kathryn was born, Elmer purchased their home, 136 Cardinal Road in Glenroy. It was a cozy, unassuming 3-bedroom home with a backyard, which was exactly what they needed to raise a family. Therese gave birth to their second child, James, just 5 years later, and in 1964, they completed their family with their second and youngest daughter, Karen. Elmer was a quiet man and generally withdrawn. He is said to have spoken in a very soft voice, but with a thick Irish accent. He kept to himself and didn't speak to anyone about his family at home, or of his prior life of living in Australia, which many people thought was odd. He worked as an unlicensed electrician for the Victorian Racing Club at Flemington's Racecourse, and he typically fixed the telephones on site, and it was a job he had had for about 14 years. However, despite his soft voice and unassuming nature, Elmer had quite an explosive temper, very bad anger issues, which was witnessed by many colleagues over the years. He was greedy and financially driven, and he accumulated thousands of dollars, which nowadays are equivalent of $60,000, which he kept in his savings, and he didn't spend whatsoever. He was kind of miserly, which can't really blame him. That's not a bad thing. Some of the money was ill-gotten. He stole copper wire from his employers and burnt off the insulation before selling it at a local auction house. He would take anything he could get his hands on that was worth any amount of money. Elmer owned several pieces of land as well as his own home, and his family were very financially secure. He didn't need to steal, but yet he continued to do so. Everyone who knew the family described them as just like the usual. I mean, they were happy. It was a great family of 5. Therese and Elmer, they appeared to be good parents. But little did people know, Therese was struggling terribly with her mental health following the birth of her youngest child, Kathryn. She had postpartum depression, and tragically, while struggling to cope, she had become pregnant again. I'm telling you, postpartum is not something to take lightly.
Well, and then to mess the hormones up again by getting pregnant? Ooh.
In the weeks leading up to the 1st of July, Elmer, while taking a vacation from his job, was seen by many people filling his car to the brim with items, household items, before dumping them at the local dump. He did this every day for weeks, as well as having huge bonfires in his backyard. And the bonfires were described as being so large that many people passing by just thought the house was on fire. That's how large these fires were. People just assumed that they must have been really clearing out the house, getting rid of a lot of junk, or that they were planning to move. Nobody considered this to be suspicious at all. But when his vacation came to the end, Elmer didn't go back to work.
Oh, no.
On the morning of Wednesday, July 1st, 1970, at around 8:15, Elmer heard a knock at the front door. And when he answered, he saw Kathryn's school friend just outside waiting for her. They normally walked to school together. He told her that Kathryn was very ill and she wouldn't be going to school that day. And then he closed the door. And the girl was confused because she knew Kathryn had really loved school and she'd really have to be sick before she would miss it. So she continued on, though. That afternoon, at around 4 p.m., neighbors of the Crawford family saw 13-year-old Kathryn and her younger sister Karen, age 6, playing and chasing each other around the street in the pouring rain. Elmer was also seen wandering around the front of the house during this time. Later that evening, a woman was going door to door conducting surveys about television and whatnot, and she had stopped by Elmer's place and asked him if he would do a survey. The woman said that Elmer was doing something inside the trunk of his car, but he reluctantly agreed to do the survey before going back inside. And she is the last person known to have seen Elmer that day. It had rained heavily all that day, and it continued to rain throughout the night, but it cleared up the next morning. About 150 miles away, at 1:30 p.m. on the 2nd of January, 2 tourists were exploring the Loch Ard Gorge in Port Campbell, Australia, when they noticed something strange. Now, if you don't know what the Loch Ard Gorge is, it's actually like this huge seaside cliff. It's gorgeous. Scary as hell to look down, but it's gorgeous to look at. People were looking out towards the sea when they noticed something strange. They saw a yellow 1957 Holden sedan car with severe damage to the front. It was hanging off the ledge below the cliffs, just inches from falling into the water. The tourists alerted authorities immediately, and the cliff rescue squad were brought in to assist. From a distance, the car appeared to be filled with trash, and no bodies or people were visible inside the vehicle. So first responders decided to leave the car where it was, but they did go on carrying out the initial inquiries. They just assumed that it had been stolen or possibly dumped on site. They were able to trace the registration of the car back to Elmer Kyle Crawford of Glenroy. And by 6 p.m., John McCarty, an officer of the Broadmeadows Police, knocked on the door of Crawford's home. But there was no answer. John assumed that the family must have been out, so the officers returned again at 10 p.m. that evening. But when they received no answer for the second time, they found a very small window to climb through. And that's when they made a horrifying discovery, which, of course, you knew that was going to happen, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Inside the master bedroom, the mattress and sheets were heavily saturated in blood, and the children's room were in a similar state. The beds were soaked with blood, and there was blood spattered on the walls and a trail of blood drops on the back porch, in the yard, and it ended in the garage. The home was eerily silent. There was a half-eaten meal on the table. The carpet looked it had just been cleaned, and it still had wet patches, and there was even cleaning solution that was left on the counter, and it still had bubbles, which meant it had recently been made to clean the scene. The officers concluded that somebody had left in a hurry, probably after John McCarty had knocked the first time that evening. As it began to dawn on them that the dumped car may contain something more sinister, the group rushed back to Loch Ard Gorge, hoping that the vehicle hadn't been disturbed by the turbulent sea. Luckily, it was still there, perched on the ledge, waiting. On the 3rd of July, 2 members of the rescue service, George Cumming and Cecil Bergen, were finally able to descend the 52-foot-high cliff to access the vehicle. And they said around the vehicle there was like shards of dishes, there were apple cores, there were just litter and trash all over the ledge that had fallen out of the car. So when we said that the car looked like it was full of trash, it literally was full of trash.
I wonder why you wouldn't check that. It's not like the car just got there by accident earlier.
Well, it's a 50-foot-high cliff that they would have to scale down. Plus, the sea is there, so you have this sea that...
Yeah, but now they have to do it anyway.
And you have to remember that in July, it's cold. It's the opposite weather of what we have here.
It's not really cold,
in Australia, but it's still
Australia,
winter.
But it's not that cold.
It might not be cold to us, but it's cold to them.
The whole point is, like, if you're an officer and you see a car on a ledge, how did it get there? Did people just jump out?
It could be dumped. Who knows?
Would they do that?
If you have stolen a car, you're going to dump it no matter where.
Okay, that's true.
Right?
That's true.
And it was full of trash. They couldn't see anybody, so it wasn't like a rush to go send people 52 feet off a cliff
down
onto.
Yeah. I envision the movies where the people are, take the car and they're getting rid of it, and then at the last minute they jump out and it goes off the cliff. That's what I envision. Okay, go ahead.
Before they were able to bring the car to safety, they were able to grab a few items through the smashed out window. They were able to get a cardboard box that was in the car, as well as a .22 Browning rifle. Inside the box were family photographs, one being of a young woman with 3 children and a middle-aged man sitting on a bench. There was a sleeve of crackers, cables with alligator clips on the end, a homemade baton, which was basically a rubber hose filled with lead, some old bank books, and an extension cord, amongst other things. Once they had the car anchored and towed back to safety, George and Cecil were able to open up the doors. George was later interviewed by the Herald Sun in 2008 and said, quote, "We lifted the tarpaulin, or tarp, and Cecil said, 'I can see some feet.' When the tarpaulin was removed, a bedsheet was folded back, and I saw 4 bodies wrapped in bed sheets." After opening the back doors of the vehicles, rescuers found Therese, Kathryn, James, and Karen piled into the back seat on top of each other very neatly. Their pajama-clad clothing all wrapped in bed sheets, and it was clear that they had been brutally murdered. Elmer Crawford was not in the vehicle, and his body was not visible anywhere in the surrounding area. The car was also stuffed with drums containing gallons of gasoline and was described in one newspaper as a virtual bomb. A rubber hose had been fed from the exhaust through the roof rack and into the windows to make the scene appear a suicide. A rope had been tied to the steering wheel and was locked in place via the trunk's door to keep the steering wheel straight. And of course, the back seat had been removed to be able to get the rope neatly patched through. It was also found in Elmer's garage, too, by the way, the back seat. The accelerator was weighed down with a shoe and a hammer, suggesting that nobody was actually driving the vehicle when it went over the edge. While the officers were trying to piece together all of the evidence, they then learned that Elmer had been spotted twice at his home the day before, the day the car had been found, before the officers had even knocked on his door. A lady by the name of Barbara Smith had seen him at the front of the house, and 2 other girls corroborated this, claiming that they had driven past when they had witnessed Elmer walk to the front door of the property, anxiously looking both ways before going back inside. Working on the theory that Elmer was still alive and brutally murdered his entire family, the police issued a warrant for his arrest, describing him as a 41-year-old electrician who was 5'4", stocky build with curly brown hair and also a receding hairline. Drivers searched the water for Elmer's body, but there was no evidence to suggest that he had been in the car when it had gone over the edge. The police carried out a reenactment of what they believed had happened that day, using the same make and model of car, and weighted dummies to replicate the bodies before piling in the trash that was found in the original car. They pushed the car over the edge of the cliff and filmed the result to support their theory that Elmer was never inside the vehicle. Unsurprisingly, they proved exactly that. The model car landed just 18 inches away from where the original car was found, and the damage to the body of the car was almost identical.
Wow.
Like, it was severe. Like, I'll post some pictures.
I always think that's so interesting. I don't mean to interrupt you. When they put the dummies in there and I think that's brilliant.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, you could tell it fell flat on the nose of the car because it was completely smushed. All the windows were...
Just like the other one, right?
Mm-hmm. Like all the windows were smashed out. Everything that was in the trunk came up to the front. It was all... It
landed exactly the same to prove their point. That's amazing.
It proved that if Elmer was inside the vehicle, he would have remained inside, being crushed between the seat and the steering wheel upon impact. I mean, the impact was so bad that the steering wheel was like up on the roof. Mm-hmm. And, there's no seatbelts. He would have been impaled on that steering wheel. Elmer's small motorbike was left outside, and the canvas bag attached was soaked in blood, suggesting that it had been in close proximity to the bodies and had possibly been used to return back to the home after he had dumped the car. The back seat of the car had been removed to make space for the bodies and to make sure that the rope was attached to the steering wheel and trunk, furthering their belief that the murders were completely premeditated. Despite Elmer's temper and his frequency to steal, he had managed to spend his whole life keeping his nose clean. I mean, there wasn't so much any information for the police to go off on in terms of his criminal background. They knew nothing. Australian police even contacted the Irish Garda, and they weren't even able to provide any further information. He never got caught stealing once. Or if he did, it was looked past.
Pretty shady.
There's no clear motive as to why Elmer would have done something so horrific, but police did discover a letter that Therese had begun to write to her sister about the new pregnancy. It said, quote, "I've been so upset, but what's the use? I am 2.5 months now. Looks like I have had it this time." Also on the table were 2 letters to the editor from a 1969 copy of the newspaper The Age, which gave opposing views on the abortion debate. And as we mentioned earlier, the family was not in any kind of financial problems whatsoever. But approximately 2 weeks before the murders, Therese had drafted up a will that specified that all of her possessions would go to Elmer in the event of her death.
That was 2 weeks before?
Yes.
Convenient. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Now, would he have married or would he have murdered the whole family, despite already having enough money for his wife's possessions?
Yes, I do.
Now, the family was about to outgrow their house, of course, and many speculate that Elmer didn't want to spend more money on a bigger house or another child, but instead wanted to take the money and run. The only way to do so was to get rid of his family, but to make it look like Therese was guilty. Another theory was that Elmer wanted Therese to have an abortion, which she would have strongly opposed to since she was a very strong Catholic. He might have gotten angry when she refused to. And, of course, besides not wanting to lose everything in the divorce, there was also the theory that maybe Therese had known that he'd stealing from his employer and threatened to tell the police. So we're not really for sure. 12 months after the death, the coroner's report was released, and it included such horrific details that many were disgusted to discover the true brutality of Elmer Crawford's actions. According to the report, Elmer waited until his pregnant wife and children had fallen asleep. He then attached a homemade 2.5-foot electrical cord or some cable to Therese's earlobes in her hand with alligator clips.
Gosh.
She was estimated, remember, she was estimated to be about 3 months pregnant with the fourth child. He had then taken the cords and placed them into an electric socket and electrocuted her to death. Or they were also a theory that he used that homemade hose that was filled with lead and knocked her on the back of the head and knocked her unconscious and then electrocuted her.
Yeah, I would think the alligator clips would hurt. I would feel that even if you're a heavy sleeper, you'd feel that, but what a gruesome,
to his wife and pregnant unborn child. Then Elmer entered Kathryn's room, his 13-year-old daughter. He repeatedly hit her in the temples with a pickaxe or weapon, which they later think was a hammer that was found in the back of the car. He crushed her skull.
That's his baby.
He then did the same to 8-year-old James and 6-year-old Karen before electrocuting them too. All of the bodies had electrical burns on the soft parts of their skin, and it's believed to have been from the teeth of the alligator clips.
I guess in his mind, he thought that car was going to go off the cliff and explode. That's what he wanted, right? So that little...
And then if it didn't and it just sunk to the bottom, people would see the hose that was from the exhaust to the window and think that the mother, with her postpartum, had done it, had killed them both. Maybe he thought he'd report them missing later. He then piled their bodies into the car before pushing it off the ledge of the cliff. Investigators then theorized that Elmer climbed to his motorbike and rode it back home in the pouring rain, convinced that he had committed the perfect murder. However, in the darkness, Elmer didn't realize that the car fell on the ledge and that it didn't blow up. And he was horrified when the police came knocking a mere 18 hours later. All of the children had died due to a fractured skull, whereas Theresa died as a result of electrocution. And the blood evidence does suggest that the children were all asleep when the murders had occurred. An inquest to their deaths speculated that Theresa was electrocuted and not hit over the head because Elmer wanted it to appear that she had killed the children. He had considered every minor detail to disturbing lengths. All of the children and his pregnant wife were hidden under piles of trash and wrapped in a tarp, waiting to be lost at sea.
That's awful.
The coroner finalized his report by stating, quote, "The evidence is that Crawford was not in the car when it went off the cliff, and I am satisfied, so far as the police evidence is concerned, that he is still alive today." He then ordered a warrant for Elmer Crawford's arrest. And unfortunately, this is when the case becomes extremely frustrating because nobody can find Elmer. And there was no CCTV to rely on. No one has any idea where he could have disappeared to.
Please tell me they found him. by now?
Well, over the years, there's been many sightings of Elmer across Australia.
No way.
A trucker who goes by the name, which I absolutely love, goes by the name Nugget Wright. Nugget believes that he spoke to Elmer in the following years. This strange man told Nugget that he was originally from Melbourne. And when Nugget asked where his wife was, the man just simply stated she was long gone. And according to the trucker, a man described leaving Melbourne in 1970, the year the murders occurred. When Nugget asked him why, he said, quote, "I had to leave in a hurry. I did something terrible." This is the point where Nugget grew suspicious and asked him if he was the man the police were looking for. According to him, the man then changed his body language completely and quit speaking. And Nugget thinks the man then realized that he had just said a little bit too much.
Did Nugget ever talk to this person again?
I don't believe so. But the police believe that the sighting is credible, and they investigated the lead, but unfortunately, they were not able to find any further information. In 1994, 24 years after the murder, a woman who was said to have known Elmer fairly well had seen a man that looked exactly like him at the Bunbury Hotel in Western Australia. She was so convinced it was him, she approached the stranger and asked him outright who he was. And according to the woman, he had told her that he was a tourist who was visiting from New Zealand. 3 years later, in 1997, a woman by the name of Alma, who worked at an auction house where Elmer would take his stolen goods, she was on vacation with her husband in Perth. This kills me. Which is another area in Western Australia, which, by the way, all the sightings were in Western Australia.
So he didn't even venture. Never mind. Go ahead.
She was convinced she had seen Elmer inside a cafe in Perth. She says that he had dyed his hair red, but his face, it hadn't changed at all. Once the man who looked like Elmer got up and left, she told her husband, she's like, "You know what? It's Elmer. I'm sure that that's Elmer." He replied, "Well, we're not going to do anything now because it'll mess up our holiday." Which,
well, okay, granted, yeah, you might have
he's not lying, but
talk to police for a while. However, this man brutally murdered his family. Compassion.
So, of course,
buddy.
So they didn't report the sighting until they got back to Melbourne. And by the time they had reported it, of course, the man had completely gone. Now, this is interesting. In 2005, a man in a morgue in Texas was suspected to be Elmer. A facial comparison of the body matched Elmer's 100%. And the dead man in the morgue had mutilated his own fingerprints, so they couldn't get a good print. They couldn't take the prints.
Oh, that's him, isn't it? Wow.
The man was also carrying 4 different false IDs, each with a different name. Adrian Donahue, an ex-police officer who assisted in the recovery of the bodies back in 1970, said, quote, "I thought he'd still be in Australia, actually. He was sort of a loner, and the sort of fellow that would just crawl into a hole in the ground and live there quite comfortably, I think, for a long time. He did a remarkable disappearing act. From the time right up until now, there's never been any confirmed sightings of him either in Australia or elsewhere. It was such a cold-blooded, well-planned exercise that it makes you wonder why he did it. All the experts have matched all the facial characteristics that they can, and they've all come up 100%. When you add that the fact that he mangled his fingerprints so it couldn't be printed and had 4 false IDs in his possession, he was obviously a man that didn't want to be found." Despite this lead being the closest detectives ever came to finding Elmer, in 2010, a blood relative of Elmer's was tracked down, and the DNA confirmed that the body in the morgue in Texas was not Elmer's, which sadly took this case back to square one. In 2008, an age progression picture of Elmer was released alongside a $100,000 reward for anyone who could assist in the investigation and finally bring justice for the Crawford family. At this time, Elmer would have been 79 years old, and authorities believe that it's a last attempt of capturing him, but nothing ever did come of it. The family home was sold in 1975, and Elmer's half of the estate is still unclaimed, presumably because claiming it would have been impossible without revealing his whereabouts. If Elmer's motive for killing his whole family was to receive money from the property, it didn't work because he essentially killed them for nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Elmer Kyle Crawford would be around 92 years old right now, and if he's alive, he's managed to successfully spend the last 51 years evading capture, and it's likely he will never face justice. And if anyone does have information, please contact Crime Stoppers. You can call them here in the States or in Australia, or you can go to www.crimestoppersvic.com.au. Now, it's interesting. I did quickly read a book on this whole family murder by a man by the name of Greg Fogarty. And the book is called Almost Perfect. You can purchase it on Amazon. He was raised on the street where the Crawford family house was. And he said he was obsessed from the case from a young age. And he believes that Crawford has to be dead by now. But the book is really interesting. He goes into a lot of detail that we have left out here in case you want all the gory details and how they got the car on the ledge and brought it up. It's really interesting. I suggest picking it up if you're interested. But Almost Perfect by Greg Fogarty, and I'll put a link in the show notes.
I was thinking, I'm shocked. Well, first of all, I thought for sure you were going to say the wife did it because she was mentally struggling with the pregnancies. Mm-hmm. But then...
That wouldn't be the first time. Look at Andrea Yates.
Totally. So then I thought, okay, so he did it, but he will for sure be caught. I mean, he probably got married, had another family. You know, we've had that before. Yeah, and then Clifford. Nothing. Mm-hmm. So maybe he really didn't have another family and he just...
He was a loner, they said, so he just kind of...
He didn't want the money.
Australia's an awful big place.
It sure is. Not to mention the world is. And if he had money, he could have slowly made his way out. I mean, they didn't even find the bodies till a couple days after the car was found. So he had a nice big head start. Yeah, he sure did. Mm-hmm. Wow. That did not turn out like I thought.
No, not at all. But it is really interesting. I can understand why that's a big case in Australia.
And because he's electrocuted? What a brutal death. I mean, there's so many other ways to go that are less violent. Especially, he beat his children to death, basically. They were asleep, yes. And then to make sure they were dead, he electrocuted them. From what I read in the Almost Perfect book, he claims that the boy James was beat first and then electrocuted while still alive. Or he was passed out, but he was still alive, I guess. But he wasn't quite dead. Alive, yeah. Kathryn, I believe, was completely dead. I believe, if I remember correctly, she was the most brutally attacked. That's the 13-year-old.
Yes.
Right? Kathryn's the 13-year-old.
Kathryn was a 13-year-old. Karen was the youngest. I believe that it was still brutal, but it wasn't as brutal. I don't even know what other word.
Horrendous. It wasn't horrendous or as violent.
Her skull in, but she wasn't hit as many times as Kathryn was.
And I wonder if Kathryn, there might be some stories there too.
James actually got out of bed and saw, and that reminded me of.
I would say maybe Kathryn was beat up because she was older and more powerful, but then also that might be telling in some other things that I don't want to mention about a father and daughter and things like that too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I understand. That's speculation. We don't know. We have no idea, but it's just brutal. And it's curious as to granted, it is the 70s. With that for
so long.
It is the 70s, but how does someone just disappear?
Well, then it's a lot easier than it is today, but still, it's not something. Did he have family? Did he have parents? Did he have siblings? He would be okay just cutting them off.
He's given away. He was raised by his grandparents. He had a brother. There's no talk of his brother much. I don't know. I guess he really came forward with the blood.
He had no problem cutting ties with everybody and just saying, see you, bye-bye.
Well, he killed all the ties that he had, literally, and then just walked away.
That's awful.
Absolutely. The whole filicide thing fascinates me. It scares the hell out of me that somebody can do that with their own kids. And I mean, if you notice, I've picked a couple of those cases. I tend to go towards those cases because that's what's fascinating to me. But I think it's more that it scares the hell out of me that somebody could stoop that low to kill something that close to them, and that
to be that violent. The way he did it, he could have just had a gun, shot him in the head, and been done with it. But he didn't.
Carbon monoxide poisoning. It almost gassed him.
That he liked it. He wanted them to suffer a little bit.
It's ridiculous. It's mortifying.
That's a good case, Jen. I've never heard of it. Not that I would, but the fact that I don't know.
Could you imagine how exciting it would have been if somebody, the Melbourne police get a call saying, I think we have Elmer Crawford here. His facial features, everything look exactly,
wow. And he,
and then the disappointment of not.
Mm-hmm. Well, and to spend your life on the run, do you know how stressful? Anybody would do a double take at you. Maybe they think you're good looking, or maybe they think that you look familiar, and you would automatically go, oh, I got to get out of here. Like, what a life. What a life. And what a jerk.
I don't know. Wow. At 92, 93 now, he could very still be alive. He could have went on and
remarried and had a family, too. Who knows? He could be living in, Maine, United States. Went out again. All right, Jen. Hey, good case. And remember, until next time, lock your doors.
And keep passing by those open windows.
Bye-bye.
Love ya. Today's episode was researched and written by me, Jen. For more information about this episode, as well as all other sources, please check out our show notes or the podcast website at ourtruecrimepodcast.com. Our True Crime Podcast is developed and created by the hosts, Jen and Cam. Original music and audio mix of all our True Crime Podcast episodes is courtesy of Nico Vettese from We Talk of Dreams. You can reach Nico at wetalkofdreams.com. Listener discretion is provided by Edward October from Octoberpod VHS. You can find all of his great works on YouTube. Please make sure to like and subscribe to our True Crime Podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts. We can be reached on Instagram and Facebook at Our True Crime Podcast or on Twitter with the handle at Our True Crime Pod. You can also email us at ourtruecrimepodcast@gmail.com. We would also at this time like to thank our patrons. We would be so lost without you. Thank you so much. And if you would like to help support the show, you can check us out on patreon.com/Our True Crime Podcast. You can also show your support by leaving a 5-star review on Apple or simply just tell your friends about us. It's that easy. Love ya.
Normally, I would say that's good, but then what we do, it's not.
You ready?
So that's not good. Yes, I'm totally ready. Let's go.
And she's not here.
Oh my God, I can hear you.
You can?
I'm still recording. I'm still recording.
You were totally gone.
Yeah, it's still recording and I can hear you. It just says it's unstable. Yeah. So I don't know if it about popped off, but it's still going.
No,
so
it was.
Keep going.
It completely sounded like you weren't there at all.
Oh, I wasn't, because a little sign just popped up and said your internet is unstable, just like me.
Okay. That's true. Yeah. That's true.
I know.
All right. You ready? In 2008, an egg progression. In 2008,
egg progression.
An egg progression. The brutality of it all is shocking. And whoops, I accidentally called Nico. Oops, sorry.
Hi, Nico.
He
we know
just
it's.
texted me, and I went to.
What about 10 o'clock at night over there? Woo.
Yeah, probably.
Hey, Nico.
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny.
It's about 8, I think. But yeah, I'm just going to keep on going.
That's what you do. You just keep talking. Are you there? Because I don't have a sign.
I am.
Okay, let's wrap this up so this
But
one can
are you
be
still
done.
there? Did you leave?
Yep, I'm here. Can you hear me? Nope, I'm here. Right here. Can you hear me? Hello?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
See, it's dropping out slightly, but it keeps going. So I think this is workable. Yeah, I can totally hear you. Yep. Can you hear me?
Well, we might need to.
Nope, we're good. We are good. Are you there?
It looks like Camille's internet has gone down, and I am so surprised. Hello? Are we there?
I'm here. Are you there?
Okay.
Poor Nico.
Yep.